All right, you grasshoppers. Well, we're certainly increasing the intelligent quotient of this show. First of all, getting Ali on. Ali, great to see you again. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And our new guest here, just a gentleman I met here, very impressive man. We'll give you his credentials here. It's Bill Franco. Bill, how are you doing?
Doing very well. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good, doing real good. So, Bill, I looked at your bio and everything. You've done a lot of stuff. I'm going to start at the bottom of the list. So, that one thing that really impressed me, well, a few things. You get 21 marathons that you've run, and you've done 2 triathlons. One of the triathlons was in France. That's great. Good job.
That's correct. Yeah, actually, I've done 3 Ironman. I've done Lake Placid in 2010. I'll even go back. I've done 4. I finished 3. My first one was Lake Placid in 2010. My next one was France in 2015. That was the year of the big heat wave in France. The temps got close to 100. I got through the swim, I got through the ride, I got to the run, and I stopped sweating and I started getting chills. And never a good combination. And I was probably 10 miles into the run. I probably could have walked to the finish, but that's never the way you want to finish a run. And I walked off the course. I just thought, it's not worth it. We came back to Virginia, Northern Virginia, where we lived. And my wife says, "You're going to do it again, aren't you?" And I said, "Yep, heck yeah, I'm going to do it again." So I did it in 2016, and I finished in 2016. It wasn't as hot, fortunately. Right. And then I did Mont Tremblant in Canada in 2017, and I finished that race. And wow. It's so beautiful up there. I mean, it's just fantastic views, and the swim and the people, and Quebec, and how can you go wrong? So it was very, very cool.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, that's fantastic you doing that. But the real reason we brought you here is that you work for a company called the Conifay Group, correct? Yes. And in your role, the company's role is to find, well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but government funding primarily for pharmaceutical companies. Is that accurate?
Oh, that's correct. That's about 1/2 of the firm's work, is helping companies, particularly startup biopharmaceutical companies, antimicrobial companies, antibiotic companies, to find non-dilutive, basically federal funding, NIH or DOD funding. And if I use a lot of acronyms, just stop me, tell me stop it. But help them with startup funds. As you know, clinical trials are very, very expensive, very, very difficult to do, and success rate is not all that great. So, funding is a hugely important thing for these companies. That's about probably 1/2 of our business. The other half are coalitions, and then basic lobbying, regulatory work, health policy work. We work with a lot of clients to try to help them navigate through the maze of Washington, D.C.
And so just so everybody's aware, with Ali, again, she's an epidemiologist and biomedical communications consultant. So is that how you two met?
It is actually. We met, I'm going to hold this up again. We actually met when we were both working for Merck. And this is probably the neatest thing I've ever received in my corporate working life, which was not long before I became a freelancer. But these are 6 vaccines developed by Merck. And what Bill says is so true. And I think it's, the one silver lining of a pandemic is renewed attention to areas of research that have been going on for a long time, but maybe underappreciated. And as a matter of fact, even though I love vaccines, I didn't know that there was a working group on vaccines. There's a couple different acronyms, but countries have been working together to prepare for the next pandemic since SARS and MERS. A few years ago. And I didn't really realize that. And the reason they're working together and collaborating, and why Bill's role is so important, is because there's so much front end investment that takes things from the laboratory into the actual, vials that you might see in a doctor's office. There is just so much work in between those two. And if a vaccine has to, it just is not proven to have as much efficacy, like as actually a matter of fact, Merck, I just saw it dropped out of the COVID vaccine pipeline because it just did not have the efficacy that they were hoping to see in their clinical studies. And so it just really did not make sense, given the others that are already in development, 64 right now in clinical trials. It didn't make sense to try to push it through So there's a lot of risk these companies take, right, Bill, to try to get a product all the way from the lab, like from the scientist with, white hazmat suits on and goggles, all the way to your doctor's office.
No, that's a good overview. It's very high, very, very difficult process, many steps in the process, very, very expensive, and the failure rate is enormously high. So it was kind of a pretty amazing thing to see, 2 vaccines within a year time span, make it all the way through the process. And obviously the regulatory standard, the FDA regulatory standard of safety and efficacy, pretty high bars to achieve. And to do that in under a year when it normally takes, over a decade. They've been talking about an AIDS vaccine, Alec, no better than me, about an AIDS vaccine since the 80s. And so you realize with COVID, what a monumental achievement that was to get, a couple of vaccines. And I understand that there's a third vaccine on the way potentially that has good efficacy, a J&J vaccine. So it's remarkable, but it does point to, how, vulnerable we all can be and how important planning is, pandemic planning. One of the things that we're hyper focused on, our firm, through a coalition of small companies, antimicrobial companies, antibiotic companies. They're largely the largest group of R&D developers for antibiotics in the world. For the most part, the big pharmaceutical companies have left the stage. It's a very difficult market. The antibiotic resistance, superbugs, as you hear about them, are antibiotic resistance is rising at a really alarming rate, and development of new antimicrobials is not faring very well. And then you've got some fairly high level bankruptcies that have happened in the marketplace. So if you think about what just is what we're living through right now through this pandemic, a viral pandemic, if you look down the road and you think of if it could be a bacterial pandemic, what would that mean for the planet? That's pretty frightening, pretty sobering. Go back to the over 100 years ago to the Spanish flu. That was bacterial in nature, and a lot of people lost their lives. And so it's really important, I think, for the United States to get on a firm footing to address, what's happening in development. I think that's one of these things where you hear about Washington being so divided and so partisan, but I think there's, strong bipartisan support to do something. The new administration, I think the new Congress, there's recognition that this is something we as a country and as a world need to get way ahead of quickly.
So do you think that's happening? You do think that's happening? That they see now, because like Gally said before, some of the good things that from this pandemic is they're now aware, okay, we need to do more to be ready for the future.
I do. I do. I think it's, we're such a great country, but sometimes we tend to do things only when the barn is on fire. And,
right. Yeah.
Nobody wants that. No, clearly nobody wants that. This is something we really ought to get our ducks in a row. We ought to be sure that we don't let a segment of our development, R&D segment of science, go belly up. It's what's the commercial, the easy button? You just can't hit the easy button, in terms of science. And it's something we really have to be very mindful of. And I think there's, an element to it as well. We need to use these antimicrobials very prudently. We need to exercise good stewardship when we use them. We shouldn't give, someone who has a cold an antibiotic. There's, it's very important to, for the right drug at the right, for the right bug at the right time, or whatever that expression is. I think that's very important. So I think that comes with an importance not only of development, but an importance of diagnostics, rapid diagnostics, so that we know very clearly, what type of bacteria, what we're dealing with, and then, making sure that people are, hopefully people are smart enough to be compliant, not take a half course of therapy because they feel better, but take the whole course of therapy, because if they don't do that, they're just leading to antibiotic resistance. And so I think there's a lot of education, and I yield to you. You know more about this than I'll ever know.
No, that's not true. I mean, I know a lot of little things about a lot of things, and then I do a very poor job of actually remembering them, especially when it would be really useful talking to Tom. But I was just thinking of one of our friends, Connie Zellner, who's actually at bioMérieux now, and they make BioFire, which you were talking about, diagnostics, and the importance of really being able to figure out what bug it is at the time. Is it bacterial or viral? And so it's just really fascinating to be able to talk to people about what they're actually doing in their work and how it's helping us. I actually read the 200-page White House plan yesterday. 100 pages of it is the 12 executive orders, and then 100 pages of it is what Bill was talking about, which is this renewed focus on preparedness. But interestingly, number 7 was moving the U.S. back onto the world stage by rejoining the WHO. And I was thankful to see that. While I understood the retraction from WHO, because there's a lot of political things that happen behind the scenes with any multinational organization, there is a sense from the Biden administration that some things may need to be reformed, but I really am happy that we're positioning ourselves to be a part of this group effort in a more public way to be prepared. I mean, things are going on all the time behind the scenes. If you read in the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA, you can actually find excellent articles about pandemic preparedness that was going on before coronavirus. And as a matter of fact, they were actually working on a new pandemic paradigm for manufacturing. So Bill was talking about 10 years typically for a vaccine to go from R&D into production. What they did, a lot of people are asking me, how did we get here so fast? And I really found this interesting. This comes from an article in JAMA that I can send to you, Tom, for your show notes if you want, if anybody wants to read it directly. But basically they took, so pharmaceutical companies, and Bill, jump in, you know this better than me, but pharmaceutical companies will wait for each portion of the clinical trial to finish and get the green light kind of before they move on to the next one, because there is so much risk. So they don't front load a lot of manufacturing capacity until they know they're going to be able to get through the trial and all the way through to, okay, we've got the green light, now we go into production. Well, all of that was slid into parallel instead of serial. So instead of one after the other production phases, do the trials, then go into manufacturing, it was slid down. And so that's where that government funding is so helpful, because NIH and others work together with the pharma companies, say, okay, we're going to take care of the risk for you. We're going to make sure that when you get the green light, because the preclinical studies and the early clinical trials looked good, when you get the final green light, you've already started your ramp up. And so these doses are ready to go. So it wasn't that the safety studies were cut short in order to ramp up speed. It was that things were slid into a more efficient process. And there's some benefits from that that might be good for other things like, cancer treatments and multiple other therapies, not just rolling vaccines out. So I think that, the pressure, the barn on fire has forced us to rethink how we do things in a good way.
So obviously we see why it's expedited. Go ahead, Bill. So we see why this process is expedited for these drugs. Why isn't it done for all the drugs then? Or is it just that now we've finally seen how they can do it more in a more efficient fashion? They're going to do it
with
drugs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think if you look back, I say it was 4 years ago, the Congress passed and the executive branch, the Obama administration signed into law the 21st Century Cures Act, which basically is to help the type of acceleration that Allison is talking about. And fast forward to now, this same group of legislators is going to be doing almost identical roadshow. It's bipartisan. There's a member of Congress from Michigan by the name of Fred Upton, a Republican, and a Democrat from the state of Colorado, Diana DeGette. They both serve on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. They were the two architects of that bipartisan bill to try to help speed up, faster cures, access, for patients faster to medicine. And they're going to redouble their efforts now. They've encouraged the new administration in the first 100 days to at least take into consideration the white paper that they offered, and I'd be happy to forward that to you both. That, you know, I think that's very, very important, because therapies don't do much good if they're just sitting on a shelf and not being used.
Right.
Of course, they need to be safe and effective. Everything that Allison described. You don't want to cut any corners at all. But at the same time, patients, particularly the most vulnerable patients, cancer patients, you saw the effort a few years ago with right to try legislation. That's now, you know, part of the FDA, you know, regulatory sphere. It's now statute. You know, that sadly, if someone, you know, has cancer and is exhausted every potential type of therapy, they can, you know, go very, very quickly with their doctors, obviously their doctors' oversight, you know, to try something that might, you know, not yet have regulatory approval. So I think there's, you know, a lot more conscientious effort to, you know, obviously science and safety and efficacy is the, you know, the good housekeeping seal, you know, for the entire world in terms of the regulatory process. But I think the patient voice in all things, the regulatory sphere, the FDA, I think patient organizations have done a very, very good job of explaining what their patients need and why they need them, and in some ways kind of helping the biopharmaceutical industry and others, you know, get to a place where, you know, you're even enhancing more patient-centered care.
So, Bill, this is kind of a question for both you two, and I'm going to be totally. I'm going to warn you in advance. It's kind of a negative question. So, there's a lot of people, Allie and I have touched on this too. So, there's a lot of people in the country. It's just a lack of trust, right? The trust that you know, government officials are doing things for the right reasons, that they know what they're doing, particularly during this pandemic. Address that for me. Do you, like, I mean, obviously we're not as tied into it as you two are. Do you have that lack of trust sometimes?
Do you want me to go first, Bill?
Sure, Allison.
Well, two things came to mind. Yes, I mentioned to you in last week that I went through this process of canceling twice on a surgery that I knew I really needed because I had mountains to climb. So yeah, I really struggle with that. I'm a natural skeptic. You know, I think most scientists are. They ask a lot of questions. And so I think people who ask questions should understand that they really have a lot of common ground with scientists. Questions lead research. And I don't know any good scientist that goes to bed and is like, well, you know, I think I covered all the questions I had. We're good to go. We're going to publish tomorrow. I mean, I just don't know anybody in my line of work that is like that. I mean, there's always a massive limitation section in a research paper, and I always go to bed wondering about something myself. So I think that people who do good work naturally have a lot of questions and should be skeptical, and they should try as hard as they can to seek answers for those questions. But what I will say is that I do think that we have some work to do as far as transparency and building trust, because there is so much good research that's going on that people just don't know how to access. And I was obsessed with this yesterday, as a matter of fact. I even wrote my first post article on LinkedIn ever because I had to get it off my chest. But it comes back to hesitancy about new therapies and vaccines in particular, because that's what we're looking at now. And I truly don't think hesitancy is a bad thing. I think hesitancy is what we want our kids to do when they're thinking about smoking a cigarette, right? Or when somebody is saying, you know, hey, try this, you know, thing that you might be underage for, or hey, jump in the car with me. I don't have my license, but we're just going a few miles. We want people to be hesitant before they do things that are not great for them, right? So hesitancy is a good thing. It's hardwired into us. And I think that when we talk about hesitancy to try a vaccine, it just encourages a good conversation. And the new White House plan, I don't know if I mentioned that there's 7 goals, but number 7, remember, was move the U.S. back to the world stage. Number 6 is try to reach vulnerable communities who do struggle with trust and skepticism about this, but really have the most need. And then number 1 goal was restore public trust. So it'll be interesting to see how this works. But I think, you know, Bill and I'll speak for you, Bill, I'm sure you agree with this. In our own communities, we want to do our best to be transparent and to share what we know about, you know, the pharmaceutical industry, having worked there on the inside for many years. And we know a lot of good people, a lot of good science is going on, and it's just not been a natural part of the conversation. So I'm really making a concerted effort to try to be a little bit more out there and a little bit more open about what I do. even though I tend to be a very private person, because I really believe strongly that all of this good research and all of the good therapies, the antimicrobials that Bill knows about and is working on, the vaccines, that only works well in concert with a patient understanding when to seek it and when to use it, and trusting the physician's guidance to actually do it. It takes all of us.
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't know how much that's, I think a very good response to your question. And I think, the scrutiny or maybe the distrust that people have, I totally understand that. It's easy for that environment to be part of our daily life because we kind of see things. I mean, I just look at it from the political lens, which I'm involved in quite a bit. You see kind of the loudest voices on the nightly news broadcast, for and against, and they're loud and they're cantankerous, and there's a lot of shouting, and so it's a little bit hard to follow those discussions. And I think sometimes it's kind of diffusing those things, stepping back, having more time to actually sort out particular issues, questions, whether it's vaccines or pharmaceuticals or other aspects of healthcare, kind of allowing people to, do a deep dive, to hear from, a number of different healthcare and scientific experts, particularly people like Allison, who can actually translate the really complicated and make it understandable. I think that's really important, but to address those questions head on. And I don't think we, as a society, not assigning blame. Sometimes I don't think we do that. And maybe we don't do enough of, there needs to be more education at the patient level. There needs to be more education, within the healthcare delivery system. I think, a lot of assumptions are made that are just kind of, not particularly helpful. And I was, just before I got on the link here with you, I was reading an article about, what are the biggest challenges we face as a country in terms of healthcare cost. And it's an interesting perspective. We think about, we have these enormous costs, right, as a society for healthcare delivery. We want access to healthcare. We want affordability. We want high quality care. And as far as the eye can see, we see these costs, escalating at a pretty dramatic level. And you have cost, and if you were to simplify it, and this is what I liked about the piece, was just talking about, what are the biggest costs that are coming at us, in terms of healthcare delivery. It's largely around chronic care. It's diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease. That probably represents about 70% of the costs we have coming downstream as a society. And what are we doing about it? I mean, I think people know the value of good nutrition. People know the value of, diet and exercise, all those things. But do we as a society, put it all together in a holistic way, really address it so that we can, at least start to bend that healthcare cost curve in a sensible way that we don't bankrupt our entire system. And I know both of you are, serious athletes, and
you guys are.
It's easy.
Allie just falls down the stairs. You guys, it's incorporated into your life. How can we do that as a society so we can, really have a national discussion about it? It's not shaming somebody for not exercising. That I would never do that. But I would just say that we need a big, bold conversation. And I think the U.S., I think most people are ready for that. I think, frankly, they are. They want to do the right thing. And I think, to your original question, I think good education, good dialogue, good discussion about any subject is the best remedy. Transparency, is probably one of the best things you can do on anything. Let sunlight
address the things that we don't fully understand.
Right. And before you, I wanted to, a lot of the discussion around people who are hesitant about things is so aggressive. It's like in all the literature that I see, and even in the White House plan, which I really like, it's like we need to combat vaccine hesitancy. And, even educate is a pretty strong verb. It involves kind of like this hierarchical position of I'm in the place to educate someone and you need to receive my education. I really think what you just said, Bill, is so important in that it's a conversation. And if people have concerns, you don't need to feel this like gut check of, oh my goodness, I'm so intimidated to talk. It's like we need to be able to, as a society in politics and in medicine, be able to have conversation. And this is sounding more like a philosopher, than a healthcare or a public health person. But I've been paying more attention to that, to, possibly as we raise our children and as we talk in our families, we need to be really preparing people for handling disagreement in a way that's respectful.
Totally. Well, Bill, you talked about before, we should have Allie out on TV. Allie should be out there on TV all the time talking about this subject. Bill, you touched on a subject that's really near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bill, you touched on a subject that's really near and dear to my heart. You talked about the health and wellness and fitness and everything. Right. And you're right. You don't want to shame people into not working out. But, and rightfully so, we've shut down large parts of the country because of the pandemic, people's jobs, all this stuff. And we had to do it, and the masks and everything. But we're suffering. People are watching McDonald's commercials and Wendy's commercials, and they're overeating, they're obese, the diabetics, heart disease, all those things. Yeah, I mean, but we don't do anything about that. And I know you've said this, but like that's the thing to me is like educating people that, again, you don't have to be a fitness fanatic, but we don't have to eat McDonald's or Wendy's or all the fatty foods all the time. I hate to pick on those companies, but that's probably a bigger problem than what we're facing right now with the pandemic, don't you think?
It's actually the hidden cost of the pandemic, I think, because many of those conditions are causing COVID to be worse for people.
Yeah.
And so, Tom, what do your grasshoppers say? I mean, you have a large following of grasshoppers who are trying to be better every day thanks to your influence.
Yeah. Well, it's, what I notice with people, just as a general statement, is that we've kind of become conditioned to look at food really not the way food is supposed to be meant to look at, right? Food is meant to be for nourishment, and back in the past, before there was refrigerators and grocery stores and everything, we naturally fasted, right? When we had food, we ate it. We didn't have salts and sugars and oils on the food. Now through, again, all the grocery stores and restaurants and fast food chains and everything, we look at food as more of a source of comfort or pleasure or joy, right? So I just try to say to people, listen, you can still enjoy your food. It's just that it shouldn't be, like just because you eat healthy doesn't mean it has to taste bad. But, to eat, and again, you don't have to be perfect with your diet. I think I just see people have we get conditioned into a lot of different areas. And I think we've just gotten conditioned to look at food the wrong way now. It's just, that's my biggest problem.
Well, Bill can talk to the microbiome in food, right, Bill?
No, sure. Yeah. And Tom, you're right on. You're spot on with respect to food. And I think one of the first things I learned when I started in the early 90s training for marathons is that my diet improved dramatically. I pushed away from fast foods. Not that, once in a while, do I like to go have fast food? Of course. If my kids wanted to go, I would do that. But I found that my training improved, my runs improved. And, the other thing that I found were the people in my network, people I knew, they became very, very curious in what I was doing. So tell me what you're doing, because they themselves were kind of going down that path too. They knew that they needed to exercise. They knew they probably needed to eat better. And so I probably have 40 to 50 people that, kind of been in my network of like asked me a million questions. And if anything I helped stimulate for them was, could you walk to the grocery store versus taking your car? If it's too far away, you can't do that, obviously. But can you walk your dog twice a day? Can you go for a ride or run? Can you take the stairs up to your office versus taking the elevator? Things like that. And so I've got this network of people, and to me, that this really fires me up to do sort of the next race. People ask me a million questions. I'm encouraging them. And I think
You
with
pull
respect to Allison's question about
Yeah.
microbiome, yeah, that's a new and exciting field. I mean, we know we have not so great gut bacteria, and we've got really good gut bacteria. And what does that mean for our system and warding off, potentially, challenging diseases that we face? And that's a hugely important thing. I think probably the controversy in that space right now is, there's kind of a regulated, semi-regulated side of that, and then a very unregulated, kind of the wild west of microbiome. And I think at some point, the regulatory officials are going to have to, you want to create certainty in the development space. You want to have some rules of the road so that you don't have bad actors. You want to make sure that patients are, safe, and that they're taking, therapies that are safe and appropriate. So I think this is a whole new frontier. It's kind of an exciting frontier.
Yeah, but you're right though, Bill. I did notice the same thing when you do clean up your life and you're really into health and fitness. So people around you start seeing, when they see the results, right, how healthy you are and everything, and then around they see now, okay, I want to be the same way as Bill is. Well, listen, Allie, just to be sure, how do people get a hold of you if they want to interact with you more or even hire you?
They could go to abcmedicalwriting.com.
Very good.
ABC
Bill,
Medical Writing.
Bill, we're going to have you on again. This is fantastic. Listen to you. And again, what's really eye-opening for me is, we sit there and like we talk, we watch the news, and that's where we get our sources of information, right? For somebody like yourself that's involved in it all the time, it's really interesting to hear your take on all the things that are going on. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you. Oh, no.
Thank you, Tom, for having us.
And so great to meet you, Tom, and on video here. And it's always great to see Allison. She was kind of my wing person at Merck. When I had a lot of dumb questions about science, she was the person I leaned on the most. So
okay, we have to end with this. I can't let this go, Bill, without bringing this up. So Allie, they sent me a picture of the meal that her husband cooked, and in the back there was a big bottle of sake there. So I asked about the sake, and I found out later on that after a few glasses of sake, Allison was falling down the stairs in her home.
Well, no, it wasn't even multiple stairs. It was only one stair. I went up and retrieved all the plates from I actually failed to go up a stair is what happened. I was in the dark with plates, and I was trying to navigate without my contacts in. So it's dark, hands full, and I stepped and there was air. I was like, whoa, I'm trying to save the plates. I'm going backwards. Ben is watching, and he's like, it just kept going and going. And then I'm like yelling, and I'm just lucky I didn't brain myself on the Japanese Go. Have you heard of that game Go? I have it,
No.
Nice artifact in that room, not an artifact, but call it that. So, but what I'd like to tell my family, because I'm actually not an athlete like you guys, but I just like to joke that I am. Like, I would have gotten really injured if I hadn't been such an athlete. That lets you fall better.
It's always a positive way of looking at it, Allie. Always a positive way of looking at it.
Yeah.
You fall better when you wreck, if you're in shape.
I think
What's that, Bill?
I've experienced sake a few times, and I know exactly. I've experienced sake a few times, and I know exactly what she's describing.
Well, I used to handle it. Yeah, it was weird. It was not much. It was like two little glasses, but it's been, I've been back in the U.S. for 4 months, and so I'm out of training.
That's right. There you go. Gotta start drinking more often, Allie. That's the problem.
That's not how we want to end on this, Tom, right? Because actually, is alcohol not so good for the gut biome, Bill? It's probably not, is it?
Oh,
Bill?
I don't know. I just moderation.
Moderation.
Everything moderation.
Moderation. All right, guys. Great to see you again. We're going to have you on again, Bill. You're fantastic. Thank you very much, Allie. Great to see you as always.
Thank you very much.
I'd love to join anytime. I've really enjoyed this experience. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom.